Hello and welcome to the West Asia Post with me, Ghadi Francis. This is our weekly show where we bring you all the latest updates and stories from this region that I call home. Today our top story is about Iraq, a war-scarred nation where Western domination is being shaken up by China. Beijing has gained major foothold in the oil-rich country in fields like energy and construction. Some even warned that these infrastructural projects would leave Baghdad in debt. So we tell you more about the Chinese dominance in Iraq in the next report.
Most of us associate Iraq with war and instability, a battleground between the West and Iran. But that also means opportunities. You see, Iraq has been at war for almost 2 decades. First, the United States invaded the country, and once the US left, the Islamic State emerged. Both these conflicts have ravaged the country. Now Iraq's #1 priority is rebuilding. How much money will that take? At least $88 billion. In the last decade, it was US who was involved. They called it nation building. But as they pull out of the country, another nation is now filling up the vacuum. China. China is expanding its presence in Iraq. Almost 44% of Iraqi crude is sold to China. It's an important supply line for Beijing. In return, Iraq gets massive investments. They call it the oil for construction deal. Beijing-Baghdad ties strengthened under former Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi. In 2019, he said Sino-Iraqi relations are ready for a quantum leap. Iraq is already the 3rd biggest exporter of oil to China. But officials are keen to secure Chinese investment. They need Chinese money to help rebuild the country. As for Beijing, it expects Iraq to play an important role in the Belt and Road Initiative. In fact, it calls Baghdad the 3rd most important BRI partner. Why? The first reason is oil reserves. Traditionally, Saudi Arabia has been the top supplier for China. But Beijing wants to diversify. Iraq has a lot more untapped reserves than Saudi Arabia. Baghdad is also desperate for foreign investments. This makes it easier for Beijing to negotiate with them. But the most important reason is a chance to displace the United States. Washington is slowly pivoting from West Asia to the Pacific. That leaves a political vacuum in the region. And needless to say, China is eager to fill it. Last year, Beijing struck new deals worth $10.5 billion.
The idea is now to include projects for the construction of roads, bridges and railroads, energy, oil and electricity, and also the health sector and ports. All these projects are being studied in order to determine their locations and needs in each governorate, and then they will be referred to Chinese companies under this agreement.
But while reconstruction is good, the problem is China's intentions. Even middle-income countries are falling into their debt trap. They are unable to repay Chinese loans. Many believe the infrastructure projects could leave Baghdad in debt. Many question how much of Iraq's oil is being mortgaged off to pay for Chinese investment. That's something we don't know the answer to. So Iraq must be wary of this. Yes, they need money for reconstruction, but they also need to preserve sovereignty and autonomy. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
From Iraq to Iran and Qatar, we have a lot more lined up for you in this edition of the West Asia Post. But first, let's take a quick look at what else is making the headlines across the region.
Iran-linked fighters were killed and U.S. soldiers were injured in the U.S. raids on Iran-linked targets in Syria. This come amid negotiations over the 2015 nuclear deal. Erdogan says warming Israel ties won't weaken Palestine support in a meeting with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. This comes a week after Turkey and Israel announced a decision to establish diplomatic ties. Qatar has announced it aims to spend $3 billion on various commercial and investment sectors in Pakistan. This as Islamabad is set to provide troops for security at the 2022 World Cup. In a first, an Israeli plane flew over the Saudi airspace to Seychelles. The Arkia flight IZ-611 flew along Saudi's Red Sea shores, reducing travel time by 20 minutes. 8 pilgrims were killed when a landslide struck Iraq's Qatarat al-Imam Ali, a popular pilgrimage destination. The landslide hit the ceiling of the shrine, which then collapsed on top of the pilgrims inside. Another significant section of the devastated Beirut port silos collapsed on Tuesday in a cloud of dust. No injuries were reported, but the collapse was another painful reminder of the 2020 Beirut port blast.
Washington and Tehran are edging closer to restoring the nuclear deal. The United States has responded to the latest draft of the deal, adding that there remain some gaps. Now, even when the Americans are saying that some gaps remain, even with all this uncertainty, Iran's Arab foes are mending ties. They are now developing a pragmatic approach, one that involves engagement and containment. We tell you more about this.
Conflicts are not new in West Asia. Since the dawn of the 20th century, the region has seen plenty of them. But among all the uprisings, deadly civil wars and military insurgencies, 2 countries always seem to be involved: Saudi Arabia and Iran. The Saudi-Iran rivalry is a fight over influence. The whole of West Asia is their battlefield. For decades, Tehran and Riyadh have been bitter rivals. Saudi Arabia saw itself as the leader of the Muslim world, but this was challenged by the birth of the Islamic Republic of Iran. For decades, these countries could not see eye to eye, but now, resigned to the revival of the nuclear deal, Saudi Arabia is engaging with its old foe. The two are holding talks, several rounds of them in Baghdad. This comes as the nuclear deal looks within reach. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have always been opposed to it, but with its revival being pushed, the Gulf states are now engaging with Iran. A move to contain tensions in the region. The United Arab Emirates is set to restore top-level diplomatic relations. Its ambassador will return to Tehran soon. Kuwait too returned its ambassador a fortnight ago, its first ambassador to Iran in over 6 years. As for Saudi Arabia, it is holding direct talks with the Islamic Republic. Saudi Arabia was the first to downgrade ties with Iran in 2016. This was when an angry mob stormed the Saudi embassy in Tehran, setting fire to it following the Saudi execution of a prominent Shiite cleric. Soon after, the Gulf states did the same too. But now they are trying to de-escalate in the region. Security assurances are an important part of this, so instead of depending on Washington, they are engaging directly with Tehran. The reapproachment comes amid uncertainty. If there is a new deal, it will lift sanctions on Iran. The Gulf states fear that it will allow Tehran to expand its influence. On the other hand, if there is no deal, regional tensions could escalate. For Gulf states, both scenarios are a cause of concern. For years, they have been engaged in a struggle with Iran. At the center of this war was ambition and influence, but it looks like their priorities have now shifted. They are no longer depending on Washington, but taking security issues in their own hands. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
We are less than 100 days away from football's biggest festival, the FIFA World Cup. But in Qatar, a new controversy has kicked off. Doha has arrested and deported foreign workers. This is after they were protesting against late pay in the capital. So the question is, will Qatar's maltreatment of migrants taint the legacy of football? We bring you the story.
Gigantic, futuristic, and rising out of the desert, these stadiums are impossible to miss. Everywhere you turn in Qatar, there is a new one. Qatar is preparing for football's biggest festival, the 2022 FIFA World Cup. Less than 100 days from now, these stadiums will be packed, full of frenzied fans, screaming at the top of their voices. It is the first World Cup to be held in West Asia, the biggest event to take place in the Arab world, and Qatar is leaving no stone unturned. It is using the tournament to showcase its rise from a small pearl diving enclave to a Gulf metropolis. Thus, the construction spree. Each of these structures were built by an army of workers, many of whom hail from South Asian nations. Now they are protesting in the capital. They say their wages have not been paid by the Gulf nation.
One of our team in Qatar interviewed one of those striking workers, and we discovered the same day that the reason why these workers were striking was to have not been paid for several months. And that, in fact, this was the second time they had gone on strike in the last 12 months.
Qatar reacted swiftly. It arrested at least 60 foreign workers and even deported some of them. This includes some Indian migrant workers. The workers' protest and Qatar's reaction to it could further fuel the concern. It has cast new doubt on Qatar's pledges to improve the treatment of workers. The protests were on Doha's Sea Ring Road, outside the offices of the Al Bandari International Group, a conglomerate that deals with construction and real estate. Qatar's government later confirmed that the firm in fact had not paid the salaries, but instead it ended up arresting the protesters, holding them in a detention center in stifling heat. This is not the first case of abuse of migrants in Qatar. Since clinching the hosting rights, 6,500 of them have died in the Gulf nation. Most of them work in dangerous conditions. They are involved in low-wage labor, often in scorching heat and without safety measures. Their living conditions, too, are appalling, with their passports often seized to entrap them. The Gulf nation has hit back at the allegations, calling them sensational and outrageous. This is not the first time Qatar has been pulled up for this. But it says that it is reforming the system.
Quite frankly, if this is what's happening to a group of workers complaining about not being paid this close to a World Cup, what's going to happen to Qataris or anyone during the World Cup that takes that moment to exercise their human right to express their opinions, their concerns about the society, about gay people, about women, about other workers who might talk about other issues?
Qatar is not new to human rights violations. It is an absolute monarchy with freedoms in check, but the FIFA seems to have turned a blind eye to this, even after claiming to protect human rights across football. Football is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Outside stadiums, it holds immense power, and with that power comes immense responsibility. But away from screaming fans and world-class players, it remains complicit in human rights violations, earning profits on the graves of thousands. Qatar 2022 is not the first World Cup engulfed in controversy. Records suggest it will not be the last one, as fans throng the stadiums for football's biggest festival. Will the deaths and latest protests taint the legacy of the World Cup? West Asia Bureau, WION The World is One.
An Iraqi actress is suing The Economist for defamation. But why? Apparently because of this article. The Economist published a story on why Arab women are fatter than Arab men. The article featured a photo of Iraqi actress Inas Talib. So Talib is now suing the outlet for defamation. Why does Western media think it is okay to dictate body standards across the world? And why are Arab women in the center of their scrutiny? We bring you the story.
To Inas Talib, the headline felt like a spiteful punchline. It read in bold, "Why women are fatter than men in the Arab world." Below it was a photograph of Iraqi actress waving from the stage. It was an article by British weekly newspaper The Economist. It ran through various possible explanations of the obesity gap. A 10 percentage point gap between men and women in West Asia. Then, the article cited Iraqis who see Talib's curves as the ideal of beauty. The word fat was repeated 6 times. Since its publication, the article has triggered massive criticism. Women are appalled. It is the same misogynistic scrutiny that has defined their lives. Talib is now suing the London-based magazine for defamation. She calls it a violation of not just her rights, but that of all Arab women. Analysts have long acknowledged an epidemic of obesity in West Asia. It is connected to poverty and gender discrimination. But this article isn't about obesity. It was about body shaming, an issue deeply rooted in the region. The report argued that West Asia desires what they call fleshy women. So they linked it to an explosion of obesity. Talib's horror began with her photo. It was used to illustrate the growing waistline of Arab women while trying to impose the beauty ideals of the West. She blames the unrealistic body standards that the West often thinks are global and relevant. In Lebanon, the demand for cosmetic surgery has boomed. In the Emirates, 75% of female students say they are dissatisfied with their body. 25% of them even have eating disorders, all because of beauty standards that the West holds ideal. Most women in the region often struggle with insecurity and find a need to alter their bodies, all in the pursuit of beauty. For Talib, her lawsuit is a message for women, a message that resonates across West Asia, where women always see the odds stacked against them, whether it is traditional attitudes, pay disparities, or rigid beauty standards of the West. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
A crusader fortress on the Syrian Mediterranean coast welcomed thousands of tourists before the war. But for the last 11 years, the custodian of the castle has had a lonely job. He has been waiting for the return of tourists, hoping for the return of the tourists to the architectural marvel. We bring you the story from Syria.
Every morning, Younes Dayoub climbs the steps to the Al-Markab castle. He then uses a large metal key to unlock the wooden gates. After this, it is a long day of waiting. The 49-year-old government employee sits inside a ticket booth, waiting for the visitors that never come. The Crusader-era fortress is located on the Mediterranean coast. It is close to 1,000 years old. First fortified in 1062 AD, the hilltop site is an architectural marvel. The finest example of the military architecture from the age of the Crusades. Dayoub has been the custodian of the fortress for the last 15 years. Before the Syrian war, tourists from around the world would come here. They would climb the high walls, wandering around its cavernous halls. But the civil war has kept nearly all foreign visitors away. On the other hand, domestic tourism has come to a halt.
10 years of war followed by the coronavirus pandemic, and now, as you see, there is a shortage of fuel. Tourism has decreased, especially local tourism, and regarding international tourism, there is none at all.
Dayub always has a bundle of admission tickets with him, but no one to issue them to. When he gets bored, he passes his time sipping tea or enjoying the tea, remembering the days when visitors used to throng every corner of the fortress.
We used to get foreign and Arab visitors before the war, but they stopped coming after the war. The situation here now is totally different to what it was in the olden days. Now days go by without anyone visiting. Rarely does anyone visit the castle now.
He still sits in his booth most of the time, waiting and whiling away time. Keeping him company is just a portrait of President Bashar al-Assad. Dayub still hopes that visitors will come back one day. When they do, he is even willing to give them free tickets. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
That's all we have for you on this episode of the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a brand new lineup, bringing you more stories from the world's most volatile region. Until then, stay safe. I am Ghadi Francis, coming to you from Beirut, Lebanon. And you're watching WION World is One.